You're building software and now you want to make it more maintainable. Some would even say make the code great again. One way to do this is using the dry software principle, which is do not repeat. The problem with dry is that dry will make you cry. And dry is also very overused. Here's how to use dry well without overusing it. Let's get to it.
Okay, let's go.
The dry software principle is a hard one to balance. The reason why is, what is the opposite of dry? Well, it's wet. Write everything twice. Write everything twice is a terrible advice. So you have something that they're seen as the good advice and something that's seen as the bad advice. And then of course you're gonna do more of the dry principle even though you probably shouldn't. So the question is really, how can we balance dry without us overabusing it? Because this is one of the things that is overabused the most. The dry software principle is the hardest one, I would say, to administer. And you see even senior developers argue for and against using dry in certain principles. It's something that can be very overheated. Experience will show you when you're using dry wrongly, because this is usually where the pains come, when you finally figure out that you shouldn't have used dry in this function, this entity, or something like that, and it really starts hurting. You will basically end up with a function that's impossible to refactor and nobody understands and dare touch. I have some basic rules on when to use dry. The first one is, if in doubt, don't use dry. Simple as that. Number two is, you should favor utility functions over dry and over like trying to simplify and refactor that part of the code. I'll go into more details about that later. And number three is, only use dry when you're repeating yourself 4 times, because that's when it really starts to hurting. If you copy paste sometimes, yeah, it's okay. The rules are far from perfect, but they should give you a good hand in showing you when to use dry and when not to use dry. Before you even start using dry, you should probably consider using what I call utility functions instead. And I'll go through here like an example on how to do it just very abstractly, so you can see what I mean. So you can see here that I made a very sketchy example here in JS Paint. It's not very pretty, but you can see you have A, B, and C. These can be anything, functions, classes, whatever. And you want to start using dry on them. And we have a simple A is almost equal to B is almost equal to C. So we have like a lot of potential here. Now, what I would suggest to do instead, though, as long as you can do it, is to make them smaller, but then use utility functions. So you can see here, I made D here. D is basically just a utility function that helps you do some more things. So we have still the same functions because they're now even proportionally more different than they were before, because the things that we could take out, we took out. So this is a very simple example of what to do instead of using dry principle to just like keep reducing your function to be one function for all. Here's the secret sauce to how to use dry software principle properly. Number one, keep the dry functionality very simple. This makes it easier to refactor and reason about later. Number two, favor functions over fancy data structures or classes. Again, this is simplicity. When you make sure that you have like a simple function that you reuse many places, it's a lot easier to reason about it than it is with a huge class that have like data structures nested inside of it. So just keep it simple. Number three, inject behavior instead of complicating the dry entity. So for example, we have a run cron function, and this gets the database, it gets the name, it gets the type, and the on arrow. These are all either entities or commands that we can call, like functions we can call. Instead of having a big class of reusable functionality, we have just this very small function that then takes the different entities injected into it. This makes it a lot easier to change and reason about later. Now tell me, how have you misused dry in your career, and what have you learned from this? And I'll see you in the next one.